Morning, Kelly. Morning, David.
Morning.
David's staying quiet.
The
reason probably was we're having a little bit of problem with David's sound.
Just in case my sound isn't good.
You managed to speak without your lips moving just then. That was quite impressive.
It's Beaminster.
I didn't know you had a qualification in signing.
Anyway, carry on.
Right. Shall we do be really unusual today and please the bishop?
It probably wasn't the correct pronunciation.
Should we go and please the bishop, David, and actually crack straight on into the reading and have none of this waffle that she complains about all the time?
So we go straight into our harvest reading.
Go for it.
Okay, John 6.
Go for it.
Verses 25 to 35. When they found Jesus on the other side of the lake, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty."
So there we go. A lovely reading for harvest, I think, because we're fully in harvest season now. I think Callie only has one harvest service, but David and I are in the thick of it, going around all the villages.
We've got a our parish Eucharist this coming weekend, so that will be harvest. And then, in fact, there are other churches doing their own harvest festivals on different days. Bradpole have already had Songs of Praise harvest, which I think sounded great fun.
That did sound great fun, doesn't it? But why do we celebrate a harvest? What's the whole point?
Because some vicar decided to create it because lammas had been abused by farmers. That's the honest answer.
Thanksgiving.
They used to celebrate lammas as harvest, in effect, bringing the first seed, the first fruits of the harvest of the seed in the form of bread to the church. But they were all drunk after all their hard work the night before, particularly in Cornwall and Devon, it appears, Chris. Perhaps you can brief us on that. And they started getting drunk and didn't turn up in church for the service. So the vicar thought he would separate us away from the harvesting time, so they could celebrate their fortunes. And then he created harvest festivals. But they had their harvest supper the night before, got drunk, and still didn't come to church. And but we have this kind of Victorian hangover of harvest festivals. Whilst we, of course, are now in the creation season, so are thanking God for his wonderful creation and all that he provides to us in the form of food, as well as many other things.
See, I actually got heckled.
Does that answer your question, Chris?
I got heckled on Sunday in church, almost on this same subject of why are you talking about us giving our first fruits? It's not lammas anymore.
Yeah,
quite right too.
Well, they've said.
So now you can explain to them, Chris. I mean, many years ago, when I was appointed rural chaplain for North Shropshire, because Lichfield was North Shropshire as opposed to South Shropshire, which was the Hereford Diocese, Bishop David Hallett, who appointed me, said, David, many benefits will come to you for this. You'll be invited all over the wherever to preach at harvests. When you preach at as many harvests and sat and had as many cold ham and potato salad teas as I've been forced to eat, the effects of harvest tend to wear off a little bit. Because you realise that Harvest Festival today, while celebrating, quite rightly, and we do, has turned in many churches into a good reason to make funds for their churches from their harvest suppers. And we've kind of forgot the reason why we're celebrating if we're not careful.
You see, I could go back to a bit more on harvest and the fact that harvest has actually been celebrated for about 6,000 years.
It has.
You know, way before Jesus joined us or joined in the ritual of saying, give thanks to God for what we've got. Because, you know, we've all got thanks, or we've all got food on our table, for which sometimes it's so easy to take it for granted. And therefore, let's be thankful of what we've got and be reminded of where it comes from. And as I've been saying in school assemblies this week, it's very easy. I picked up a little seed potato because I've got a seed potato in my drawer ready for next spring, all shriveled up and dried out. It's somehow, how do we give thanks for that turning into a packet of crisps? And you can go through the process of, yes, we plant it and we do what the farmers do, but when it's dug out of the ground, it's got to be washed and peeled and sliced and fried and packaged and stored and transported to a shop and then bought. And that whole chain helps cover what we give thanks for.
And what it really struck me actually when I was reading that reading from John, how the followers were all talking about works. You know, what do we do, etc. What must we do to perform the works of God? And actually, with your seed potato example, funnily enough, God's doing an awful lot of the work.
And that's been part of my point in the assembly, is we don't know how a seed potato turns into a nice green plant and lots of potatoes grow. As well as God providing the rain.
I've been thinking more this year about the whole of God's creation and what he gives to us. And I think it was Ignatius Loyola who wrote that God created everything, and therefore God is in everything of creation. And we should rejoice at that. And it's quite interesting because many years ago, when I was a curate, I worked with a chap who was probably one of the very first eco-warriors in the Church of England in the 1980s and 90s, a chap called Tony Hodgson. He was the team vicar there, who died now, God bless him. And he was part of a group that set up the rural networks and things for the Church of England. And what he did was he belonged to a group. He created a book which I've got on my bookshelf of creating liturgies for times of the rural year. But he had a group of men called the Staffordshire Seven, they were known as. But one of those was heavily into Ignatius Loyola, and he believed that when the time comes and we're back up in the glorious call to God, everything that has been created because God is in it will be recreated and reformed and made again. How about that, for a creational idea?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And he deeply believed that, and people thought he was quite bonkers, probably including me at the time, all those years ago. But I began to see a deeper reality about where he was coming from. And it is about all that God gives us, isn't it, in creation? It's not just farming on the land, of course. It's those out at sea who bring us the catches that they take in. It's those who turn what is grown on the land, as you quite rightly said, Chris, into food. And one of the farms I had up in Shropshire, in our parish in Tilstock, they grew potatoes specifically for walkers.
Oh, we lost you. We lost you mid-sentence then, David.
Because if they didn't fit through certain sizes and Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, your sound
Is that
just broke
better?
up mid-sentence for a sentence.
Yeah, it's a crucial
I'm sorry, I
sentence.
was saying he grew these potatoes for Walker's crisps, and there was a lot of wastage in reality, because if they weren't certain sizes, then Walkers wouldn't have them off him. So you'd see bags of potatoes for sale on the road, which no one else would buy, but we would buy because we could use them for anything else.
Hmm.
But as far as Walkers were concerned, they were actually classed as waste, and he would have potatoes returned to him, and he showed me all the labels, and it said from Walkers waste. And this idea of something that isn't good enough for one is certainly created by God, and is certainly good enough for somebody else, and shouldn't be just seen as a waste of time.
There's something
So this whole
really,
idea of
yeah, sorry.
carry on, Kelly.
Well, I was just going to say, there's just something really interesting about harvest, about story. So, in this John passage, and actually in the other reading, the Deuteronomy, one of the other readings, the Deuteronomy reading, you've got this story of God's salvation and God's plan and God's uh, uh, care of creation and of God's people. And I'm quite interested in that idea of story. They certainly were telling the story, weren't they, of being saved and from Egypt and freed and manna, that God's provision of manna in the wilderness. But also, it's interesting, Chris taking a seed potato into school. That story, the story of the land, the story of what's produced, and the story of God's bounty. And there's something about holding on to these traditions,
Yeah.
and telling those stories that is really
I think that's part of what churches still do, isn't it? You go into most of our churches for harvest, as I'm sure with yours as well, and they'll be decorated to the hilt, won't they?
Mm.
And I remember when I was a child. Now I couldn't have grown up anywhere farther away from the countryside than anybody else in England, really, because the only reality to the country was in the name Black Country, which of course was nothing to do with rural life at all. But our church come Christmas, come Harvest Festival Saturday. If you with a beauty to behold, every window stacked with food and tins, and you couldn't move. And the good people of that church, if they weren't country folk before, they even listened to the Archers that weekend just to prove they were in the mood for harvest. It was fascinating to see that connection from years gone by, when there would have been a lot of rural land around before the Industrial Revolution tended to take a lot away. It is still intrinsically in the blood of people to want to celebrate and to give thanks. Certainly in church life, to give thanks to God for what He creates and gives to us, and as you say, Callie, His bounty as well.
Yeah, and it was really interesting that this weekend happens to be, the first Sunday of the month, and it's our parish service, so we're celebrating harvest together. But actually, each of the individual churches in our parish will be celebrating their own harvest festivals. And when I first arrived in Bridport, and we were discussing the clergy rota, and I remember making a suggestion, would we do harvest together? And absolutely not. Each of the individual churches do harvest in their own way, and their long-standing traditions, and you meddle with that at your peril.
Harvest, I don't know if you've been to you, Chris, but harvest for us started 2 weeks ago with the first of the dinners, and then services and things go on. And the last one we've got is on the 18th of October. It'll have been 6 weeks
Amazing.
of somewhere in the team celebrating harvest, either through service or through sharing of food in suppers. And some of the foods have dropped off because they can't get the people to help. So they're being ingenious. And last Sunday afternoon, before their service in the evening, I went off to South Perrott, and they had an afternoon tea. It was beautiful, and there was no charge. People could make a donation, and lots of churches give their money to charity. But I know that at least 4, and I'm sure some of your churches will be collecting for the food banks.
Yes, I was going to ask about food banks, because harvest is generally, I'm not sure about specifically in and around Bridport, but harvest generally does sort of change and develop a bit. It did become very heavily a sort of food bank thing, didn't it? With lots of donated tins of whatever.
It still is in some of our. I mean, I'm aware of at least 4 of our churches where they've asked for food to be brought in as part of the offering, and I jokingly said in Beaminster sermon, because Helen, who runs the Beaminster Food Bank, was there, and I openly said, I hope you've got enough room and space to take all this food that's coming your way, and she assured me she had, which is good. But no, I think you're quite right. We do try to keep it relevant, don't we? The church tries to keep everything relevant that it does, but some of these special occasions, like harvest, for instance, is one area where we try to do that.
And what about Creation Tide? Because relatively recently, September's been Creation Time, and so does that? Do you? We certainly sort of keep that slightly separate from harvest, but they can merge really. In that this harvest season lasts for as long as it does through September into October. But September, we're definitely wanting to mark Creation Tide, and that is slightly different to harvest. That's much more.
What do you do, Chris, about that?
I mean, I've got my harvest this year is a bumper thing, going down many big subjects, because we talk about creation and that we look after God's environment and we give thanks for our environment. We talk about the fruits of our harvest, talk about our belief, but I also bring in a bit of stewardship of, we're giving back to God. So I also tell people to make sure they up their direct debit sort of thing.
Yeah,
So you got that as well. So it's almost dabbling in so many different subjects, all because harvest is the food on our table is so essential for us, and that's all given to us by God. And what do we give back? And then, so you end up at the end of this John reading, I am the bread of life. I was trying to see if it was in this reading. I can't find it, but it just say, I think it was last week, this is the work of God, that you believe in him. And, we're all about this now and the not yet. So the harvest stuff is all about the now, and we always talk about the now, and we give thanks for the now.
Mm.
But Jesus always reminds us to go, and don't forget the not yet. I am the living bread. I am the bread of life. And that's such a fantastic statement to say, this is where we are.
And the not yet breaking through, the kingdom stuff breaking through now, eternity breaking through.
You see, I've always thought that the church, like a lot of other people these days, gets cottoned into having special things. Actually, we should be always thanking God for his creation. We shouldn't need a special season to do that.
Give us our daily bread.
Yeah, we should always be thinking about protecting God's environment, as a lot of our churches do today. And so I'm not, whatever, because you're quite right, Kelly, as you say, about the kingdom, because what does Creation Tide lead into? It leads into the kingdom season, which was, again, a new kind of, how do we fill the gap between All Saints and Remembrance and the beginning of Advent? We'll call it the kingdom season. But the kingdom season is always upon us. The kingdom is always upon us. And I think sometimes we have to be careful. And like you, Chris, I've used harvest and often do for that idea of refreshment, of looking at your gifts for the church. But I think all in all, we mustn't ever forget that God is good to us. We must never forget that there are those out there who put their life on the line in danger, i.e., those who fish, those who do all kinds of things. There are those who race around our lanes trying to ensure that they get from one field to the other before it rains, so the harvest can be collected in. But harvest time, Chris, I was told by a lot of our farmers their main harvest had been done by the end of July.
Yeah, they've done it early, but it hasn't necessarily had high yield.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I was listening to a discussion on the farming program on Radio 4. It's early in the morning for those who don't do early in the morning, but you can listen to, of course, back to it these days on podcasts. And that's what they were saying. It doesn't mean, some of the fields have looked good, but as you quite rightly say, Chris, and life experience of course, is that it's not always the best quality, is it?
No.
They've been harvesting or they're going to harvest in Cambridgeshire rice.
They are. I heard
rice.
that.
Did you hear that? That's extraordinary.
The first ever paddy field in Britain.
Yes, in the Fens.
Yeah, I heard that. And of course, I heard you saying, I think probably just before we came onto the live recording, Chris, about a farmer that generally, not whatever, but the milk price, for instance, has dropped dramatically. And if you are a farmer that's heavily reliant upon your milk payment coming through, and you're seeing it dropping down, it must be a frightening thing to do, because you can't keep on buying extra cows because of the cost of buying them and feeding them and all the rest of it, just to increase your yield to try and make the same money that you were making 2 years ago.
Yeah, and also you can't increase your yield quickly. Farming's a slow business.
It is.
To harvest, even if you're talking about cereal crops, you're sowing in March at rogation and harvesting in July. That's like 4 or 5 months. And cows, well, you've got to have a calf and let it grow, which takes 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
You've got to plan. You've got to plan the extra food that you want to have if you want to increase your number of cows. You can't do it instantly, and yet the milk price fluctuates instantly, and milk price will collapse. Well, you've still had to have the same cost of producing the food and harvesting. Contractors' fees don't go down because of it.
Did you notice, Chris, how I brought my rural knowledge into that kind of conversation for a moment?
Well, I didn't really think you've been in a rural environment for a long time.
I think just trying to bring all this back to some sense, not sense, but to some purpose. What I love about that reading you chose, Callie, from John, is that it reminds us that it isn't actually just about being fed with food, is it? It's about the spiritual food that we need to take in as Christians and followers of Christ. And how are we fed? Well, we're fed by prayer. We're fed by being and walking alongside Jesus and knowing Jesus for ourselves. And part of this podcast or this recording has always been to make Jesus known. And I think the key thing in making Jesus known, that's what feeds us spiritually. That is the bread from heaven, the manna that we search for. And
we're fed actually by the Thanksgiving, bizarrely, because the Thanksgiving itself, the celebrations, the coming together of the community to celebrate, that is definitely, spiritual feeding as well as physical feeding. And actually,
absolutely,
of course, it brings us back to the Eucharist. That the Eucharist means thank you. And the bread of life, there is Jesus right at the heart of the Eucharist. And what is the Eucharist? Bringing to God, before God, those basic elements of bread and wine. And then he transforms them.
Absolutely. And being a child of the Eucharistic movement, I will say hallelujah to that.
And of course,
Chris,
there's the now and the not yet in the Eucharist. There's the immediacy and the eternity.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you for setting all this up again for us.
Yes.
We hope Chris's mum is poorly. We pray for her. We hope that she gets better soon, Chris, and home from hospital again.
Thank you.
We continue to pray for Bridport and for what's going on for their future and development.
Thank you.
And we continue to hold before God the spiritual food we all need for the week ahead.
And prayers for you and for Jane too.
Thank you very much. I need prayers immensely, believe me. So there we are. Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye then.